Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good to have you here for our first webinar of the series. My name's Craig Young, and if I haven't met you, I'm the CEO of 2Ads. It's great to have you here. And thank you for Chorus for helping support this series. This is the first series of webinars that we've run since obviously the lockdown started, and we've pivoted towards doing things online. So really happy to have you here. A couple of things as we get started. We have 3 guests today who will speak on the topic. And as we go, you can give questions. You can place questions and answers in. Questions. We'll take those. At the bottom of your screen, if you hadn't used Zoom before, there is a bar that has some options in it. There's a Q&A button that enables you to put questions in. We can answer those. There's also a poll bar. We're not actually doing a poll today, but that's one we could do at some stage, and a chat bar. When you chat, you can either choose to chat to the panelists or all the other attendees. There are at least 60 of you in there at the moment. But I do ask you to be professional and I would normally say family friendly, but given we're all adults, I'm sure I don't need to say that. We are hosting a series of 3 of these webinars. This is the first one. The 3 are all on working from home. Given that we're at home now, what we've done 2.5 weeks, we're into the home stretch almost. Well, who knows? We'll find out next Monday. But yeah, we thought we would start with this topic, given that we're all learning to remote work. And we're suddenly in a position where we are connecting and talking to people across video chat and our screens. I don't know if there's anything that you've seen about the number of hours you spend in front of your screen, but these days it seems to be all day. Today's session is going to focus in on the technology. So we're going to talk to Keith Block from Connect NZ, who are the New Zealand partners of Zoom, about the things that they've seen and the differences that they're seeing through the lockdown. And he'll take questions, anything you want to ask him. Kurt Rogers from Chorus, who many of you will have heard of before. He'll talk about, network and connectivity and how that's going. And then we're going to have a conversation with Ed Hyde, who's the Chief Customer Officer at Chorus. The aim is to take questions and answers as we go, and we aim to have you out of here within 55 minutes because unlike some of our other events, there is no alcohol or food at the end, unless it's a short walk to your own pantry. So sorry about that. I haven't figured out how to do that virtually. So again, welcome to everybody. I'm going to hand over to Keith. Keith is the General Manager, I think that's his title, he can tell you himself, from Connect NZ. So over to you, Keith.
Thanks very much, Craig. Yes, a bit of an introduction. My name is Keith Block. I'm the General Manager at Connect New Zealand. I've been involved in video for about 25 years. Connect New Zealand, we're a Kiwi-owned company. We're around about 40 years old, and we provide collaboration services, UC services to the New Zealand market. I joined the company around about 2014. And from my video background, I spent about 13 years at Spark, running their visual comms team, building out the video conferencing platform for them, which I think they currently still use now for some customers. But at that time, I was starting to see a bit of a shift in the way people were using video. So people had sort of started to look at how we could take video out of that boardroom type environment, which was quite a costly exercise to implement video into boardroom, and it was only used by a certain amount of people within an organization. So I took the time to study of global trends, and I came across the company Zoom. And I sat down and spoke to the guys and realised they were ex-WebEx engineers, and they'd built this really good product which they'd sold on, and it hadn't really developed further than that. So they set up Zoom. And when the first time I looked at it, I realised it was a great tool. It was a tool which could be rolled out to the masses. I found it quite easy to use. And so straight away, we sort of became a foundation partner of Zoom. We brought it to the New Zealand market. There was a huge uptake in our small to medium customers. We realised that a lot of universities have already been using it. Auckland Uni, Vic Uni, Otago, they've been using it for distance learning and bringing people in if they were sick or sitting at home, to bringing them in and carry on their lessons, and just to communicate back to the teachers, and also within their own little what we call bubbles now, have conversations with their colleagues and that on homework and things like that. And so it was really, really quite a quick uptake. We saw the traditional legacy video conferencing platforms were, as I said, really costly. They were based on room systems. They were based on using bridges and expensive type virtual meeting rooms. And over the course of the next sort of year, Zoom sort of release a lot of features. And they still do now, 400 odd features they add sort of each year to their platform. They brought out Zoom rooms and cloud connectors and plugins. So they really started to move out of that SME market into the larger corporates. So in New Zealand, we're really set up for using video, right? We've got a fantastic broadband network. We've probably got what I would say that probably the best in the world from what I've seen. You know, I travel quite a bit, and you go to the main centres, and the broadband's really good. You move out of that main centre, and it's pretty flaky. So, but in New Zealand, you know, broadband to the home, broadband to businesses, and fibre to the home, fibre to business is really, really good. So we saw this huge hockey stick of demand for people wanting to use the platform. And what it was brought around about was those millennials and those Generation Z, as they call them. You know, they're used to using selfies and Snapchats, and they love video. Whereas me, you know, if I wanted to talk to Craig, I'd say, Craig, give me a call, and we will talk via phone. So this huge shift started to happen of people coming from that voice environment, moving it over to video. And so what then happened to really sort of escalate the demand for Zoom is those students were coming out of university, and they were hitting the workforce, and they were talking to their bosses and saying, I've got these tools that I want to use. I've got tools like Zoom and Google and all these that I've been using all through my school life that I want to now use in the workforce. So the businesses started then to look at these tools and to keep their people happy. And so we started to sort of see the likes of architects and project teams and councils that were starting to use Zoom as a medium to run council meetings, to run out streaming services. We saw even our own parliament in New Zealand, who select committees that happen each week. If you wanted to make a public submission, you'd have to come to Wellington, or you'd have to ride in and make that submission. They moved it onto the Zoom platform to enable it to the masses, so people at home could sit in front of their device and start using it as a platform. So then we started to see this sort of real big behavioural change in people. And then we saw the large entities started to adopt Zoom, and government enterprise and big international companies like Walmart, 120,000 users, and Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, which were 200,000 users and thousands of rooms. So we decided then to put Zoom on the DIA marketplace, so enable lots of government agencies to be able to access the tool by an easy procurement model. But then we saw that shift that we knew that was going to happen. We saw that shift move away from the boardroom users, where we saw 80% usage from boardrooms and then 20% to other. We saw the usage shift. So we're now starting to see 65 to 75% usage to the desktop and out to the mobile, and very little into those room systems. So, and a lot of that is based on having that good quality fibre to home and to business as well, because people just want quality all the time. So during that time, over the last sort of 6 months, we saw a lot of customers trialing different ways of working from home. I think you remember there was a company in New Zealand that started to look at 4-day weeks, and let's say if we can consolidate our 40 hours into 4 days to give our people a little bit more time at home. Then we were talking to some other customers who had a lot of their staff who worked in Wellington but lived over the hill over the Rimatukas over into Carterton, Masterton, and they were trialing 3-day working weeks where they could do work from home Monday and Friday. So what that enabled their people to do was to move outside of those city centres and move out further out to where they found that the property was a lot cheaper out in those areas. So, people started to become frustrated with roadworks and increased fuel costs, public transport costs, and also the time to get to work. I mean, myself, I live outside of Wellington up the coast, and it used to take me 40 minutes to get to work now. Well, not now, but a few weeks ago, it was taking me an hour and 20 minutes to get to work. So my work-life balance was impacted by it. So people really wanted to start to use the video platform. So, and then COVID came, and it forced us to change sort of overnight. what we found, that those customers that we felt were using Zoom and they had a good BCP plan in place, work from home for them was pretty easy. You know, they had cloud-based applications. They picked up their device, they picked up their mobile phone, they went home, they plugged it into their fiber, turned it on, and they were working straight away. But then we were sort of inundated with inquiries from customers who didn't have a good BCP plan in place, or they thought they had one, but that BCP plan wasn't flexible enough for everyone to work from home. It just allowed pockets of people, you know, they're dialing in via their VPNs, and it basically, you know, slowed the whole network down that they had. So, you know, it was heavily reliant on a lot of IT people to help them to support it, and it wasn't flexible and it wasn't that scalable. So, you know, my team, I take my hat off to my team as well. We were doing 20 hours a day over the last 2.5 weeks. We saw a 5-fold increase in customers. We saw a 10-fold increase in users on our platform. And then, you know, my biggest concern then was, well, you know, has the Zoom platform gonna handle this amount of traffic? But they did, and the Zoom is sort of architected to scale. And so what we had to realize that COVID wasn't a national issue, it was a global issue. So we weren't the only countries that were going through this whole work from home and finding the right tool. So if you put it into perspective, Zoom went from 10 million users a day on their platform to 200 million users a day overnight. And what that, you know, to handle that traffic is pretty impressive. So, you know, I spoke with Craig last week about it, and I said to him that one government agency of ours pre-COVID had 20 users, did 70 meetings a month. They're now got over 4,000 staff using Zoom. They're doing around 10,000 meetings a month and around about 3.2 million meetings each month now. So that's huge. So, you know, the uptake has been good. So it's also moved from a B2B type platform into a B2C and a C2C. So as you will see that, you know, Zoom's being used for quizzes. We're seeing people use it for karate classes and so forth. So, you know, and people have had to adapt. You know, I was talking to a yoga teacher just yesterday who ran yoga classes in Auckland, and her business basically shut down overnight. So we sat down and we put a plan in place for her. She's now running online classes where people can come on and use PayPal to pay for that class, $15 a class. Now she's now building up her market by using these sort of tools. So it's not just a business to business type tool. It's a way that small businesses can get themselves through COVID as well. So, you know, I look at Zoom. It's got a fantastic platform. It's got great integrations into a lot of applications. It's an open API, integrates into your Salesforce and ServiceNow and common applications. And now it's got that voice component to go with it as well. So I think you'll see a lot of people moving away from that video to voice, and voice back over to video now. But just to wrap up, really, I think coming out of COVID, I'm already getting inquiries on people going, what happens when I go back into my boardroom? You know, I don't want to touch anything, right? Everyone's saying that this COVID can survive on glass for 3 to 5 days. I don't want to touch controllers. So we're now starting to talk to them about gesture controls, about voice commands, about all those types of things, which we've currently got in place for a couple of customers. So, you know, my take out of what I'm doing at the moment, Zoom's not gonna fix everything. There's that social aspect. You know, you still want to be able to go out and have a beer with your mates after work, and you want to sit down and have a coffee with your team members. But what I'm pleased is that COVID has sort of happened now, and we've got the network and we've got the tools in place to be able to at least try to sort of carry on. So that's probably about it from me, Craig.
Thanks, Keith. We've got a couple of questions that I'd like to put to you. But one of the comments I was going to make was the conversation you and I had last week around, you know, the uptake in this type of service, of course, which Zoom is an example of, and is just indicative of that growth. But you made the comment about, you know, there was a significant chunk of businesses who didn't have a BCP plan. I was on a phone call last week with other international associations like mine. And the gentleman from Germany, he felt that 40 to 50% of German businesses did not have their digital story or their digital capability in place, so that when they went to shutdown, they were in a mess and they had to pick it up pretty quickly. So, you know, one thing this has done is actually encourage us all to think about how we do this in our BCP plan. So just just in the last 3 weeks, obviously, we're in a completely different environment. You gave some examples, but have you seen what's the most unusual use outside your traditional customer base that you've seen Zoom being used for?
Probably. I mean, I've seen a couple of scenarios. I said that yoga one was probably quite a unique one, because they're in actually looking at it as another business proposition once they come out of COVID, to go, actually, we can have people from home and doing the yoga class this way and pay, rather than come into the city and do that. I've seen builders who have called us up a few weeks ago going, what do I do? How can I talk to my architect? How can I talk to my vendors? So by using Zoom as a medium, they've been able to use it and share the plans and make changes to what they want to. So it gives them a bit of an options outside of what they normally do. But I was on a quiz on Friday night. So one of the hospitality group guys down here in Wellington ran a quiz. He was expecting 50 people. 380 people turned up to his quiz. Those types of things. And if I myself, as being from England, I probably haven't spoken to my family as much as I have done in the last 2 weeks. It's really easy to use. I've used it as a way to talk to them. We had a great Easter. We sat down on Easter Sunday, had a good chat to the whole family. We brought everybody in. And I think, as I said, it's a good tool to be used in a business sense, but also, you can use it in a personal sense. We're using it at work just to touch base with our members. Now we've got 110 staff, and basically as we look at it, I've got 110 offices now, right? So for us to be able to to keep in communication with our people, and it may just be a, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? What have you been up to? How are the kids? It may just be that type of call to the people, rather than to talk about business all the time.
It's about video, isn't it? I mean, I read an article yesterday that the important thing is being able to see the person's eyes, make a connection with your eyes. Well, you can't do that over the phone, so that's why we can do so much for the video. Look, we did know you've answered one of the questions, but can we talk about the security side of things? I mean, let's talk generally, because as soon as you move away from a corporate environment, you've got security issues, right?
Yeah, oh, exactly. And I mean, look, it's well known. Zoom. There were some things in the media around Zoom and security, and it's all sort of been well documented and out there. But I think it's like anything, if you any sort of application, if you set it up correctly, and that's one thing about us at Connect. We've got a professional services team that set Zoom up to a business by GCSB guidelines, by the guidelines that Zoom security team put around it. But Zoom is also a product that you can just go and download and use yourself, and not put any of those security settings around it. And I think that's been the one of the challenges, is that the consumer side of Zoom has seen some few vulnerabilities over there. But from a business point of view, we've not seen any of those. And you've got the new options of waiting rooms. You can say that everyone in my organization with my domain is allowed to join my meeting, but no one outside is allowed to join unless the host lets them in. There's a passcode option on it. There's a ton of features that you can set up, and we work with organizations to set those security settings up from a company level, and then to an individual level as well from within that company.
Cool, thanks. Certainly, I mean, we've instigated the password option. So those of you that got the registration link would have had a link to join this particular webinar, but it had the password in it. So if you didn't have that, but you came across the meeting ID, you still couldn't get in unless you had a password. Okay, the password was Chorus, so it wasn't too difficult, but at least we had something in there. So look, Keith, there's another question there. I think I might let you answer that one directly, rather than doing an advert on the webinar about why people should pick Zoom, because we're going to move on. I'm going to move on now to, and if you have any more questions for Keith, let's put them in there, and we'll come back to them if when we come to the end. Next gentleman probably needs no real introduction, because we've heard from Kurt several times. He is the brains behind certain things. He's a smart man. He's going to tell us about the robustness of New Zealand connectivity and the fabric. So we wanted to hear about how the networks are hanging up. Well, some of my best social media posts in the last couple of weeks have been people interested to know how New Zealand copes. And we are going to be doing some work as 2Ands with other international associations about looking at the different networks across the world, who's dealt best with the situation. So without further ado, you've got some slides, so I'm going to chuck those up on the screen. But if you would like to start talking.
Right. Thanks, Craig. Hi, everyone. Look, I firstly want to say I think Zoom's fantastic. I've been using that personally to keep up with family and friends, just like you there, Keith, over Easter. It's really good, and it's quite fun with the backgrounds that you can do as well. So I think we definitely are in the Zoom age, and we're starting to see some of that impact on the network stats, which I'll show you now. So if you can roll over to the next slide, Craig, I just want to take you through 2 slides that show what's happened over the last few weeks on Chorus's network. And so we've been using the 16th of March as a pre-COVID baseline for comparing what's happened from a bandwidth and a traffic perspective on our network. And so you can see that red line there across the 24-hour time for the 16th of March, which was a Monday. It's a pretty typical traffic profile. 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, it's at its lowest. People wake up, traffic increases. You know, around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, traffic surges as kids come home from school. And then we get a peak at about 9 o'clock in the evening when everyone's watching Netflix. So in the few weeks, we've seen a new norm start to settle in. And that new norm is a 40% increase in data usage. So that's a pretty phenomenal increase. And it's been right across the day. And you can see the numbers there with the blue line relating to yesterday, is we've actually had the biggest increase during the daytime. So our midday metric has gone up by 75%. And in the evening at about 9 p.m. when the peak is, it's only gone up about 15%. So, you know, that's, I think, very clear that people staying at home is driving a lot more increase during the day than it is at night. Now, Chorus, we do have a what we call a congestion-free network approach. So we always put more capacity in before it's needed. And of course, last year with the Rugby World Cup and also quite a few fortnight download events, we've learned, and our practice these days is to make sure there's always more capacity than what we need. So supporting these types of increases isn't really a problem. If I can say, it's not really touched the sides from a network capacity perspective. And it's not just this new norm that we have to support. Just like last year when we had quite a few fortnight and Rugby World Cup surges, that's not stopped in this COVID-19 lockdown. So on the 27th of March and again on the 8th of April, we had very large surges in the evening as Call of Duty game was released. So that took the surge even higher. And again, we have plenty of capacity in the network for that. So there's quite a large amount of capacity growth there that New Zealanders have been driving, but it's been supported pretty easily. Craig, if you move, actually, no, don't move to the next slide yet. One more comment. One more thing to have a bit of a geek out on is, if you look at the shape of the curve in the red one, it's quite smooth as you move from hour to hour. But when you look at the blue line, you can just start to see what we call the staircase effect. So on the hour and on the half hour, there's just a little bit of a surge in traffic. And we started to wonder what's causing that. And I think if we flip over to the next slide, which shows the upstream traffic profile, we can start to see that staircase effect, which actually shows very clearly here as a sawtooth effect. And we believe that is people starting video meetings up on the half hour and on the hour. So at 9, 9:30, 10, 10:30, 11 and 11:30, you can see little peaks. Of course, not too many people schedule, luckily, meetings during lunchtime, so traffic drops off a little bit at lunchtime, and it picks up again at 1, 1:32, and you can see the peak for upstream traffic now occurs mid-afternoon. And it'd be really interesting to know, Keith, if this sort of correlates with your meeting time volume that you see on Zoom, because I do believe a significant portion of that increased traffic profile during the day is coming from people who are who are in video meetings, whether it's Zoom or some of the other forms. Of course, realistically, it's not just video meetings that is causing this increased traffic flow. It's probably also people not working from home. Certainly know my kids over the last couple of weeks have been consuming a lot more data during the daytime. So we've seen this big surge during the day and the big surge in the upstream as well. And so just to finish off is, often in broadband, we often talk about the downstream speed. We talk about a 100 meg plan or a gigabit plan, and that's often the main topic we talk about. I think what's happening here with working from home, and particularly these types of Zoom meetings, is we do have to pay more attention to also having that upstream capacity, that uplink speed, because obviously a Zoom meeting is a symmetrical application. And also latency becomes very critical. For gaming and also for Zoom meetings, that sort of low latency makes the quality a lot better. And we definitely see that from our fibre and copper networks. So I think New Zealand is in a really good space to be able to have that platform, to be able to handle this new norm with lots of Zoom meetings and lots of working from home, lots of educating from home, and maybe lots of not working from home as well. That's all from me, Craig, unless you've got some questions.
Thanks, Kurt. Be interesting to see what happens today, given that school started again.
Yeah, well, I've got 3 kids, Craig. They're actually just in the other room over there. And my guess is actually we won't see any more traffic, because when they're not at school, they're probably going to be generating more data consumption than when they are. So having said that, my kids were all in virtual meetings this morning to kick off the new school day. So there would have been a bit of a surge in traffic at about 9 o'clock this morning, as most kids around New Zealand, either Google Classroom or Zoom, starting their meetings as the teachers got to know them. So we'll be monitoring that closely today, see what happens. Yeah.
Cool. I'm just going to flick your comment through to Keith, actually. The one you said about was the Zoom traffic occurring at the same time in the afternoon. Keith, you got any comments about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like, if I go back 15 years of when everyone used to organise an audio conference, back in my telecom days, it was 9 o'clock, 9:30, 10 o'clock, and they were the big times of when people were using the service. And I just think it's exactly the same as now. As a Zoom meeting, we're seeing a lot of people, as you say, kick off their meetings at those sort of times. And I think we're seeing a lot in the morning. I think we're sort of seeing it peter off a little bit in the afternoon. People were having the meetings in the morning and then probably doing a little bit more work in the afternoons.
Yeah, fair enough. We've been thinking about when we host these types of webinars, for example. So we're thinking 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock are probably the right times. So it's interesting. You got to pitch when you have your meetings, because those of us that we're all sitting at home, and by about 4 o'clock, we're probably all starting to feel like we've been doing a full day work already. Just back to you, Kurt. A couple of questions for you. Great stats. Do you have any breakdown on what's actually generating the increase of the traffic, or is it you're working it out yourself?
Look, we're not able to break that down. So we are a layer 2 open access wholesale infrastructure provider. So we don't look in to see what that type of data is. It's all transparent across our network. So we just derive by traffic pattern what we think it might be, and then we correlate it with what we see on social media and stuff. So no, we don't snoop. No.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, fine. What about regions? I know you didn't put in your presentation, and I didn't ask you this before, but you got any thought about, are there certain regions of New Zealand that the increase was greater than anywhere else? Just off the top of your
actually,
head?
I do have we did do some analysis on that, and interestingly, CBDs, big city CBDs, have had a smaller increase than regional centres. So if you take those medium-sized regional towns, the Coromandel, the Fielding, the Darfield, those types of places, they've actually had a higher percentage increase in data usage than the CBDs. Now, that might be people no longer commuting into the big city, but also it might also be that those who do live in and work and service the rural community are probably not able to work from home as much, and perhaps driving more data usage that they otherwise wouldn't be, because they would normally be out and about. So a couple of reasons there. We think there's actually a bigger demand, a bigger increase for data in those regional and rural New Zealanders in New Zealand, and it correlates quite well to the places where we're rolling out UFB2 actually.
Okay, here's a bit of a nerdy question from Phil Campbell, who you will know and knows a little bit about UFB. So he's asking about the maximum capacity at 3.5 terabits. What's involved in increasing capacity?
Yeah, so the great thing about the fibre network is the last mile. So the connection from your house to the exchange really has effectively unlimited capacity. So we don't have to do anything in that last mile. What we do have to do is we have to add capacity to the aggregation network, which is basically a whole bunch of Ethernet switches that connect the telephone exchanges together. So we do have to add capacity to those, but it is a much smaller scale exercise than having to do anything in the outside plant. So we don't need to touch the fibre network, to be honest. We only need to add a few line cards and plug a few optics into a few aggregation switches around. So relatively speaking, it's a straightforward exercise.
All right, I want to ask you to cast your mind back now. This is a question. I mean, you and I have both been around for a while. Let's go back to 2010. So that's before UFB. Fibre to the cabinet, which is DSL technology, had been rolled out. How do you think we would have coped at that period in 2010?
With this event?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, look, we didn't have Netflix quite back then, did we? So, look, I think things have changed so much. 10 years, everyone's got iPads and iPhones and smart TVs, and, just think of all the applications and services we're using online today that we weren't using back then. So I think, the new norm now is so many different aspects of our lives, whether it's work, education, banking, entertainment, streaming the radio, is all online. So I think, we're in a much better situation now having that fibre. And so I think it would have been quite a different story back then, yeah.
I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but I do. In the very late 90s, we had a big electricity outage in the centre of Auckland CBD for weeks and weeks, actually. Vector were unable to supply electricity. And basically the CBD closed down. And we had to do things like move mini computers and out of there to Newmarket to actually be able to work. We wouldn't have been able to do this at all in that period of time. Just one more question for you. There are other parts of the network. So one of the questions has come through, which I thought would be interesting, the capacity of the links between New Zealand and the rest of the world. Now, obviously, any cloud platform we use, like Zoom, G Suite, Office 365, they're not hosted in New Zealand. They're hosted offshore. So how does the capacity of those cables affect, our ability to do what we do?
Sure. I mean, that has been one area there's been a bit of a tension. It's not something Chorus is specifically involved in. We tend to deal with the capacity between your house and the internet rather than
but
dealing
Kurt,
with...
you know a lot about it. So
yeah. So look, I think, most internet traffic is actually generated out of caches and CDNs that are on net located in New Zealand. But what's happened with people, a lot of working from home and using things like Zoom, which I believe the nearest Zoom server is in Sydney. I think that's the case. So definitely there's a lot more traffic tromboning between New Zealand and Australia and back again. Now, service providers in New Zealand have, really good connectivity to Australia. So I don't see that being a big problem from a capacity perspective. But I think a lot of providers have been having to have a look at their interconnect arrangements to make sure that there is enough capacity between ISP networks in Australia and so on and so forth, because this has been a new, what we call a traffic matrix. Rather than all of the content coming from on-net caches, a lot more traffic is being passed between service providers. So that's one area that I know people have been looking at. And I'll just be a bit cheeky here. Keith, can you please get Zoom to bring their server capability into New Zealand? Because that would be a much better situation that New Zealand can look after itself in the case of an emergency, and that we can all communicate with each other with really low latency without relying on the Australian networks, please.
All righty. Thank you, Kurt. Keep the questions coming in. If there's any more, we can ask them again at the end of having a chat with Ed. So now I'm going to introduce Ed Hyde. Ed is the Chief Customer Officer at Chorus. I think I've got the title right. Ed, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how you got into this role and what you're doing at the moment.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keith. Yes, Chief Customer Officer at Chorus. I've been at Chorus approaching 2 years now, after doing just over a decade at Spark in a variety of different roles. So most recently heading up Spark Ventures. But it's been a really great experience over the last couple of years joining a fixed line organization, because previously I've been in the wireless space more often than not. And look, a great place to be. CV19 has really demonstrated the importance of great infrastructure. And so we take that role very seriously, but actually things have been performing remarkably well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a few questions around, we're so reliant on the connection that's into our house. I mean, in my house, there are 4 adults. At least 3 of us are still working and constantly online during the day with Zoom. My wife is a counsellor, and she's doing her counselling by video conference, which has its own pluses and minuses, but also she needs a consistent, steady connection, because, while we can have a webinar here, we can drop off and, it's not really about people's lives, right? But when you're counseling, you're actually helping somebody with their life. So she's got to have a consistent network experience. Otherwise, she's in this study very quickly asking me what's going wrong. So how has Chorus, as the provider, how have you adjusted to this new normal, this new reliance that we have on you?
Look, I think that this is actually a trend that we've seen emerging over the last 12 to 18 months, which is, but by and large now, as a result of UFB, customers have really good quality connectivity into their home. But what that has now highlighted is actually customers' in-home experience, i.e. Wi-Fi in the majority of cases, is starting to be highlighted as the bottleneck. And so more and more of our attention now is shifting to what role do we play in ensuring that the in-home experience is as good as it could be, so actually it's not the weak link. And I sort of echo some of your stories, Craig. I've got four boys, so the household of 6, and probably at any one moment in time during the day, there's 6 to 8 video streams of some description, right across the home, and some rooms work better than others, so managing that sort of variability across the household also becomes really important. So we've got some Wi-Fi 6 capability in the lab that we're very excited about. We've been doing a lot of work there, and more recently or for the last 6 or 8 months, we've been shipping on new ONTs with Wi-Fi capability embedded, and we've got a series of plans to start switching that service on for Kiwi customers.
Cool, thank you. So one of the things someone's just asked, and I think it's a great question, given that we're all at home now, have you seen a surge in connection upgrade requests in the last 3 weeks?
We've seen a few different things going on. So I guess the most material change since going into lockdown is the categorization of essential versus non-essential services. And so fiber connection, so new fiber into the home, is currently classed as non-essential. So we're not doing that work at the moment. That's created a bit of a, well, more than a bit of a significant issue for us in terms of the amount of work that's flowing out through the field services. So a lot of attention in the short term is going on in that space. And as that sort of relates to coming out of level 4 into level 3 and level 2, actually a lot of our focus and attention will be about firing that fiber connection engine back up again as quickly as we possibly can. Outside of that, and thinking about the types of provisioning we are able to do in lockdown, we have seen a surge in upgrade orders from 100 meg plans to gigabyte plans. So customers are saying, I need a faster connection into my home to support all of this video. And so that's something that we can do remotely. We've actually also seen an increase in copper orders, which has been a bit of surprise. And actually, for the first time in a very, very long time in the last week, we actually saw our copper numbers, VDSL numbers increase, which is a sort of major shift. And that's just really a reflection of the type of work that we are able to do at the moment. I do expect as lockdown starts to relax, we can start to connect customers to fiber again. We will see that surge of orders starting to come through.
Actually, I wasn't aware. I hadn't thought of that connecting customers wasn't an essential service. I mean, I would have thought it was. We had a brief conversation beforehand about the number of consumers or the number of premises that aren't connected to fibre, and yet it's available going past their house. Do you want to just briefly mention that discussion and that number?
Absolutely. So we've just nudged through 58% of premises passed have actually got fibre active. So that the flip side of that coin is 42% of potential customers actually haven't got a fibre service in. If you think about the country, we've got a variety of areas, main centres as an example, where fibre has been in place for 6, 7, 8 years, and fibre uptake in those areas is around 80%. But then we have areas where we've only recently passed the property with fibre build, the late stages of UFB1 and into UFB2, and it's in those areas where actually fibre uptake might be sitting at 20, 30, 40%, and we think that's where we'll start to see the surge of growth after lockdown.
What are you going to do about, we may not want to have people in our house. I mean, at the moment we've got bubbles where, we're keeping nicely contained. In level 3, we may still feel like we want to maintain the integrity of our house. Now, you're doing an install service. You still have to get inside. You got any ideas on what you might do to overcome that or how to get around it?
Well, we're sort of doing some innovative stuff at the moment through fiber through the window at the moment, which is a bit of a workaround for high priority orders to actually get fiber connection into properties whilst we're in lockdown. But beyond that, and more seriously, we had a major effort over the last 2 weeks getting PPE equipment out into the field. So now all of our technicians are equipped with personal protective equipment. They've got glasses, they've got masks, they've got gloves. We've got a really strong supply of those services. We've also got processes in place with in-flight orders where we're ringing ahead to reassure customers that actually our technicians are COVID-19 free, and also confirm the status of the home to make sure that our technicians are actually safe when they enter in. So we've done a bunch of sort of process changes over the last couple of weeks to make sure that our health and safety measures are stepped up. I think it is going to take a while for customer feeling and sentiment to sort of shift and evolve as we come out of lockdown, and we're going to be working very hard to ensure the general public that we're taking a number of very deliberate sort of steps to make sure that everyone remains safe.
Yeah, Ed, can I ask you to take a bit of a broader view on the next question, rather than just being the CCO, of course, because this is a national thing. So one of the things that this has shown us is there's still a digital divide, particularly around a number of kids that can't connect, with in-home schooling, etc. And we know that Chorus has offered to a free connection for 50,000. I think it's 50,000 connections, and the other RFCs have followed as well. And now that's being rolled out. But you've just said you can't do those connections at the moment. So how do you think your role is going to be, or can you take a broader role and think about, well, how else could we help these kids going forward to make sure they've got connection in their house?
So the Ministry of Education initiative is off the back of actually a relationship that we've been working on for a number of years. So we've had low decile school trials in place in Christchurch and Wellington for 12 to 24 months, and we've been talking about the sort of societal need for internet connectivity to homes and individuals and children who don't have connection today. What's happened with CV19 is that has sped all of those conversations up. And so what you've seen over the last 7 to 10 days in terms of the announcement we made was actually a copper announcement. So we asked ourselves, actually, how can we get internet connectivity into a home as quickly as is practically possible? Copper for us was the answer. We've got pre-existing connectivity into these properties, and in more than 90% of circumstances, actually we can fire that connection up remotely. So we actually don't have to enter the property. So in the short term, we think copper is the answer to these homes. But in the medium term, we think actually what COVID-19 has shown is actually people need connectivity, not only for their sanity, but for their health, for education purposes, for all manner of different reasons. And I don't think it is realistic to from a societal perspective to accept people have no connectivity moving forward. I think that's something that we've got to address. And look, as the government is looking for infrastructure projects that they can fast track to really kickstart the economy, I think this, closing the digital divide seems like a good candidate from my perspective, albeit biased, but a good candidate.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ed. I mean, I think it's an industry-wide thing. I think we've been quite clear that we expect the industry to collaborate well on getting these people connected, no matter what way we can do it. I was just thinking,
and Craig, just on that, on the collaboration side of things, I do want to acknowledge the whole Ministry of Education thing has been an absolute team effort. So Ministry of Education, ourselves, the participating retail service providers, it's been a bit rough around the edges, but actually everyone has sort of rallied to actually get the outcome that we're looking for, and a really good demonstration of actually the industry working well together.
Yeah. I was going to just pick up on a comment you made around health and people's health. There's been a lot of talk about telehealth and being able to have consultations online rather than having to turn up to the doctor's surgery, and now we're having to do it. So I think it was the GPs were trying to get 70% of their consultations to be actually through video and telephone. And quite honestly, I don't think we're going to go back. Once we get used to this, this is the way we will go. Look, we've just got a couple more minutes. Kurt, there was one question I wanted to throw to you, just if there's any insights on international versus local traffic volumes.
No, look, we don't have visibility of that. The only comment I can make is what I said earlier. Is my understanding is something like 80% of internet traffic is actually served from on-net CDNs or caches pre-COVID-19. I would expect a little bit more increase in international, because most of the video conferencing providers don't have that presence in New Zealand yet, including Zoom. So there'll definitely be more international capacity being used, but probably only a few percent more, because I think my kids are probably still watching Netflix, and that'll be still served out of the cache in New Zealand rather than from Sydney. Yeah.
And look, we're in a far better position than we were even 5 years ago when I started in this role. When it came to international connectivity, that was a big issue in the first year. Is about, well, we've got one skinny little cable off to the States. Now we've got two. We've got three across the Tasman, and we've got another one coming. So it doesn't seem to be the issue. Look, I'll just go around the houses to see if there's any last comments. Keith, have you got anything you want to finish up with? You've hit listening to the conversation.
Oh no, I'd just like to reiterate what the guys are saying. I think I think it's lucky that CV19 has happened now. I think it's enabled us to sort of look at what we're doing from a work point of view. And I think I agree with you, Craig. I think that I don't think we'll go back to the way we were doing stuff before. Not just in the health. I think in education. I think in business as well. I think what you'll find is that a lot of people will go back to their bosses and say, in fact, I want to work from home, maybe if not full-time, but maybe part-time. And I think it's going to be a massive impact on infrastructure, on the CBD. I think we're going to, there'll be some conversations around commercial property, people wanting to downscale on what they're paying. And I think it's going to be good for the general public.
Cool. Ed, you got anything you want to finish up with?
No, I just echo sort of one observation listening to this session is the potential for what is going on now to really actually push out commerce out into the regions, to actually have a more vibrant sort of regional New Zealand that isn't actually concentrated necessarily around the main centres. And so that could be quite a distinctive change that we see over the next couple of years. That's
a really good comment and good point. Kurt, any final word?
Well, yeah. I went to the DX Summit early in March, digital transformation, and I think, from my perspective, there's a lot of companies being quite slow on the journey of digital transformation. And boy, it looks like everyone's been digitally transformed in 3 weeks rather than taking several years. So I agree with everyone's comments. I mean, we are in a new norm, and I think that norm will pretty much stay the new norm.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. I think I made that comment to someone I was interviewing the other day, that about 5 years ago I was doing some work with the government and with Crown Fibre about how we encourage small and medium enterprises to take up services. And, my comment was, well, there is no compelling event or a crisis. And unfortunately, we've got a crisis now, and it's driven a lot of behaviour and uptake. So, that's good. I hate to say it's a silver lining, but that is a point. Hey, look, thank you very much, Keith, Ed and Kurt, for being part of today. This is our first webinar we've done with a multi-panel, and hopefully it's worked well for those of you that have dialed in. A couple of things. We're doing this one again next Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Next week, we're talking more around collaboration and the tools that you have and how you can make sure those work well for you. So we'll be looking at that and communication and actually keeping in touch with people. The week after, we're doing it again, and we're going to go right through. That one will be much more around how you look after yourself as an individual, given that you're working at home and you're now doing so much more online. How do you keep focus? It's not just that, it's about your mental health issues as well. And so we'll be bringing in someone like an organisational psychologist to have a chat to us about how we might do that. If you want to be involved with those, you can go over to Eventbrite and register for the next week's. While you're there, you can also register for our next CXO Bites, which is the 25-minute interview that I do each week with a digital leader. This week it is Craig Hudson, who is the Managing Director of Xero New Zealand. Craig has a very interesting past. He's also a former Sevens All Blacks player, so we can have a chat to him about that if you want, because that season's gone by the by. On our website, just finally, we launched last week a working from home resource centre, so there's lots of stuff there. This video will make its way there, and today I got a whole lot of new stuff that will get put up there, and hopefully tomorrow we will be launching our 5G resource centre on the website as well, answering questions like, will it give you cancer, and is it causing COVID-19? The simple answer is no. But we can have that debate and discussion if you'd like to. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending the meeting. And thank you, gentlemen. And we'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.